Hello and welcome to the Recognized Authority podcast. I'm your host, Alastair McDermott, and today my guest is Frank Prendergast. And Frank's somebody I've known for quite a long time, actually. Frank, I think we have been, I think we met first back in both our old days of WordCamp and WordPress.
Yeah,
That's quite a while ago. That's maybe 15 years ago. But
yeah, I know. Crazy.
today we're here to talk about something ultra modern, which is ChatGPT and AI. So we were discussing what to talk about here today, and for me, one of the things I think that's important to kind of put out is and get in front of people is there's this range of opinions about it. A lot of people think ChatGPT and AI is amazingly good, and then a lot of people think like it's absolutely awful in terms of what it's creating. Mediocre to magnificent is the wording I use for the title here. So yeah, I just wanted to start by just asking you, because I know you've written some great blog posts, and Mark Schaefer even posted some of your stuff up. Can you tell me a little bit about how long you've been using ChatGPT for, and how you're finding it?
Yeah, so I guess late last year when it kind of exploded on the scene, I started exploring it a little bit. But at that time, I was just tinkering with it and used it for some very basic tasks like I used it to brainstorm headlines for content that I had written and things like that. But then this year, I wanted to kind of dig in a little bit more and kind of really figure out, what's it actually capable of, and are there tasks that it could genuinely kind of take off my plate on a more consistent basis. So that's what I've been playing with a lot now, since January, and just trying to come up with prompts that I can feed it, that I can reuse reliably, and yeah, what purposes it's best used for.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the I think for me the key thing is the prompts that you're using with it, and then having a realistic understanding of what it can actually do, because when you get to understand it, like the capabilities are pretty amazing, and the output it can give you is incredible in certain ways, and then it's absolutely terrible in other ways with hallucinations and things. And that's something I want to talk about. And if you have if the people watching this, listening to this, haven't heard of hallucinations before, that's when the AI actually just makes shit up. So it just makes up stuff. It puts in fake names of books that authors have purportedly written, and and this is where it's incredibly dangerous, because if you publish something like that on your website, that's going to severely impact the trust, the credibility. So yeah, I think that's one of the most important things to understand is when it can be dangerous to use it.
Yeah, I mean, I love that this is the actual technical term for when it makes stuff up is hallucinations. I love that. But it's a serious issue, and apparently it's an issue that is like fundamental to these types of large language models. So you had Meta released their large language model, which was supposed to make like scientific research more accessible. And they had to shut it down after 2 days because it hallucinated so badly that scientists were saying, look, this is actually dangerous, because people think that they're getting more accessible scientific information, but the language model is actually just making stuff up here, guys. So they had to shut it down after 2 days because of hallucinations. Then you had Google releasing or announcing that they were releasing Bard, and which is similar enough to ChatGPT, and they did a promo video, and they had somebody looking for information to share with their child about a particular telescope. And again, nobody must have fact checked the video that they put out, because again, it was hallucinating facts about this telescope, and people noticed. And apparently, it wiped off like well over 100 billion in share price when that was discovered. And similarly, the technology behind ChatGPT has been, licensed to the Microsoft Bing search bot, and apparently their share price has tumbled because of the completely bizarre conversations that are occurring with people now. So yeah, it's actually a fundamental issue with the technology. So it's crucial to realize that if you're like, you have to be the subject matter expert in what you're asking it, because you have to be able to check, is this actually true? And if you're not the subject matter expert, you need to be fact checking anything it tells you that you don't know to be absolutely certainly fact. I think a really good example of this is, and why you have to be so careful, is when I posted an article about the fact that it hallucinates, and a woman commented saying that she had been a guest on a podcast, and her subject matter is quite a sensitive subject matter. And the podcast host had used ChatGPT to create the show notes, and thankfully sent them to her before publishing them, because she read the show notes and she said, that's actually not what I'm saying at all. And actually that would run absolutely contrary to what I would believe or tell people. And because it's a sensitive subject matter, this is a big deal. And of course, the only she could tell the nuance of, no, that's the wrong message. So yeah, and this is why, with ChatGPT, what I love using it for most is feeding it my own content and then getting it to do certain tasks like creating social media posts or helping me come up with a title or, things like that, where it's my content. So I can see immediately, no, that's not right. That's not right. That's not right. So yeah, that's my kind of take on it at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the thing is how convincing it is when it's wrong. Because you see, you'll see a list of 8 books that a well-known business author has written, and all 8 of those are correct. And then it's got 2 in there at the end of the list that are totally wrong, have never been written, but it's written those in this incredibly convincing way, and you think, well, everything else was right, so this must be right too. And I think that's the key for me, is that these language models, what they're really good at is inventing very plausible output based on the input that they got. And sometimes what they create is wrong like that. And then other times what they create, what they invent, is brilliant. And that's the other side of this, because we're talking a bit about the negatives here. But the positives are, you can give it some input and then take your input that you've added and add it to the wealth of knowledge that it's already got in its database, and it creates this incredible output that can save you huge amounts of time and do a lot of kind of like the grunt work for you in creating first drafts or rewriting things or taking some simple input and turning that into something else. So I think that's where it's really amazing, is it invents all this stuff for you. And if what it invents is useful for you, then you're going to think that this is one of the most valuable things ever created. If what it creates is something that makes you look bad, or like in the case of the lady with the podcast, then you're going to think that this technology is terrible. And both of those are right.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I actually, since we spoke the other day, I came across a tweet from Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, that I had not come across before. And I thought it was really interesting. And I kind of feel like they could have been more open about this from the beginning, and it would have helped with this whole, scale of people thinking it's either like absolutely fantastic or it's absolute rubbish. Because in the tweet, which was in, I think, late December, he said, I'll just read it out if that's okay. He said, ChatGPT is incredibly limited, but good enough at some things to create a misleading impression of greatness. It's a mistake to be relying on it for anything important right now. It's a preview of progress. We have lots of work to do on robustness and truthfulness. And I feel like that message, didn't get out early enough to avoid some of the some of the misapprehensions about it at both ends of the scale. But I do think, as he says, it's great at certain things. So it's just figuring out what those certain things are and using it for those things.
Yeah, I guess I want to talk about some of the use cases, and I have an example I want to tell you about, and I think that it's important to understand, like for people to understand some of the capabilities of what it can actually do for you. So I was at training with my boxing coach. The end of training, we were just having a chat, and I said, hey, have you actually looked at this thing? And so he was asking me a bit about it. And so I asked it to give me a training plan for a boxer. And so I said, give me a training plan for a boxer who wants to improve speed and power. And it gave me like a 1 month training plan. And I said, now give me that in the form of a 5 email sequence and write a subject line for each email. And so it just took the training plan that it had created. Again, it's created this from its database of everything that it's learned about that has been written about boxing training that it has in its database, everything that was written up until 2021. And then it was able to, it knows what an email subject line looks like for an email. It knows what an email, marketing email, or an email that goes out in a sequence might look like. And it took all of that and it gives me out the entire sequence for that email. And I said, now give me an email opt-in page that will incentivize people to opt into this sequence. And it was able to do all of that. So now if you are let's say you were that boxing trainer, you want to do that for your website, it is getting you 90% of the way to having an amazing email sequence and opt-in sequence for your email already done. The thing is, some of the information that it suggested it was okay, but it was a bit bland, it was a bit mediocre, and he wasn't crazy about the specific suggestions. But that's okay because that's where we as human experts come in and then go in and add our own take on it. But it's done all the
Yeah.
heavy lifting for us. And I think that's where the key is. Then the other thing that he thought was amazing was he said, I showed him where it can actually write a story for you. And he said, well, can it write a story with my daughter's name? Can it write a story where my daughter is a princess and she wants to get a unicorn, you know? And so
Right.
suddenly
Yeah.
it outputs this thing, and that's amazing. And he said that he spent the next evening playing with his kids with ChatGPT, outputting stories for them. So like those kind of things, it is absolutely fabulous for.
And that is beautiful because then, you're taking full advantage of its tendency to hallucinate because it
Yeah,
can't go wrong. Work away, go mad, hallucinate unicorns, hallucinate rainbows. I
yeah, yeah.
love it. That's brilliant. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, exactly. So another, really solid example along the lines of the email you were talking about. So a practical use that I used it for just late last week was we had a series of videos about the 5 minute mark for a client, and I needed to get them up on YouTube. I needed to get some descriptions up on YouTube, and it would have taken me forever because I'm sitting down with a blank, with a blank canvas. I have to watch the videos. I have to decide what the main points are. So I used another AI tool, Descript, to do the transcription of the videos. Then I popped the transcription into ChatGPT and I asked it to summarize them and pick out the main points. It did a brilliant job of that. Now, as you say, it was really bland. To be fair, and I think we should talk about this because I think you have some great tips on this. To be fair, I didn't push it to write in a particularly creative way. So what I got back was really bland. However, it was a brilliant starting point. It was all the key points, and it was stuff that would have just taken me forever to even get going on. That creative ramp up that it takes. So it was fantastic to cut down on that time. Thankfully, I'm also married to a copywriter, so I was able to send those to Marcy and just say, "Look, these are really bland. Can you work with these a little bit?" And she added some flair and some creativity to them that really lifted them. So I think that kind of thing is really valuable. Just taking some of the grunt work out of content creation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And before we talk about those prompts and things, I just want to and say hello to Harzalan who's listening and watching on LinkedIn, and Irene. And I'm just going to show Irene's comment. Irene says she's seen this happen before, where she asked ChatGPT to rewrite something that she had written, and it included information that she had not provided. I asked where it got certain facts that weren't included. It apologized and said that it assumed the additional information. So that's from Irene Kohler. So thanks, Irene. So this is the key thing. You have to go and check everything that you get it to write in case it does this and it assumes it. Now, I personally would love if if the way that it output information, if we could get it to mark up in some way where it has created something or assumed something, so that we know, maybe have it in a different font or a different background color, or give you a note at the end, something that tells us where it has made stuff up, and where we need to go back and fact check things, as opposed to where something has just been created from the database. But then the other thing that's key is these have been seeded with this database of information. It's petabytes of information, huge amounts, multiple thousands of terabytes of information. But the thing is, if there was incorrect information in that seed, then what's in there is going to be wrong. So and that's the other thing. If there's misinformation in there, the output, it's going to think is correct. It hasn't hallucinated it. It's just it's operating off incorrect information to start with. So that's the other thing we need to be careful of.
I read the other day about a company. Unfortunately, I've forgotten the name, but I did read about a company who was trying to solve the hallucination problem by having AI fact check itself before it gives you the output. And apparently they've got the technology working, but the processing power that it requires means that it's not actually feasible to roll out at the moment. But yeah, so I think people are definitely working on like how this problem can be addressed.
So let's talk about some of the other things. So actually, let's talk about how to actually avoid hallucinations, or what can we do about those? And one of the things that I think both you and I have seen is that the shorter the input data that we give it, the less it tends to hallucinate. Is that right?
Yeah, I've definitely found that. So, and I think as well, it's probably worth mentioning at this point that there is you can use ChatGPT for free, but there is a monthly paid subscription. And I have found, like, since moving to the paid subscription, I get far fewer hallucinations. And if I feed it my own content, I'm much more unlikely to get hallucinations. Whereas on the free version, it was hallucinating wildly, even from stuff that I had just given it. And I think as well, a bit like Irene said, like, it would actually lose the run of the conversation if I was doing iterative prompts. So I would put in a blog post about personal branding, and then suddenly it would start talking to me as if we were discussing a post about mindfulness. Just completely random stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
and just so that people who don't use the system much, or haven't used it at all, maybe you're wondering like what we're talking about there. So there's only a certain amount that you can actually paste in. So you've got a text prompt that you can type your question or your prompt, and you can typically give it a prompt like, rewrite this with correct spelling and grammar, for example, and then you paste in some text, and it will then, or you could say, summarize this for me and pull out the key points in a bullet list. So and then you give it some text. The amount of text that you can actually paste in there is limited by the system. It just won't work if you go above a certain amount. And when you've got like we've got this podcast, the Recognized Authority, and we've got episodes that are 45 to 60 minutes in length. It won't accept an entire podcast transcript. Now what it will do is take about 8 to 10 minutes at a time, and so you can input 8 to 10 minutes of the conversation and ask it to summarize that. And the longer the block of text that you put in, I find the more it's going to hallucinate and make mistakes.
yeah, exactly. I ran some. So I find, I'm not sure what 8 to 10 minutes would equate to, but I find that about like 1,000 to 1,500 words is a good chunk that it can kind of manage. And then, so you and I have discussed previously this technique that I learned from Yuri Belast, where you can input chunks of like 1,000 words, but call them like part one. So you'll say to ChatGPT, here's part one of my blog post. Just remember this and reply with yes when you've got it memorized. And you put in your 1,000 words and it just says yes. Then you can say, here's part two. Again, please say yes once you have it memorized. You paste in your next 1,000 words. And then you can build up a much longer piece that way, by then at the end telling it, now please put together part one plus part two plus part three, and call this the post. So that's one way you can do that. But I have found that the more text you give it that way, the more likely it is to then hallucinate when you're asking it to work with that text.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so that's what we're talking about the likelihood of hallucinations being much more likely with longer text. And I haven't really been satisfied with the output that I've gotten when I've used prompts like that, where I've kind of concatenated. So I typically now only stick to short text inputs that I'm giving it. And again, like you, what I'm doing is I'm asking it to work with the text that I'm providing myself. I'm rarely actually asking it to work on stuff, to just make stuff up from its own database. Like for example, the boxing training plan that I mentioned earlier. What might be more useful in that case is if the boxing trainer comes up with five workouts, and summarizes those five workouts and says, "Here are five boxing workouts. Please write me a list of emails based on this input," and that way the output would be much more accurate, much more. It's starting from that human input. It's not just kind of taking this average mediocre amalgamation that it's inventing or creating from its database. I think that's where it can be really useful, is when you input like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, at the end of the scale where we talked about where people think that, ChatGPT is just rubbish, is where they try it out for the first time and they say something, let's say if they're a marketer, they go on and they say, "Write me a blog post on marketing," and what comes back is bland, generalized, but then the prompt was bland and generalized. So the more specific you can get with your prompts, the better the output you're going to get. And for me, I find that like using your own content, well, then that's like the most specific you can get. So I totally agree with you. Yeah, that starting, as I said, I love working with my own content, because that's really specific, and it means that I can very quickly assess the quality of the output.
Yeah, so I think we're kind of getting into prompt engineering a little bit here, or prompt generation. So what that is about writing the instructions that you give the AI in a very specific way. And there are lots of ways that you can you can write a really short, a very short prompt that's only 5 or 6 words. It's going to give you something that's very generic as output. But the more that you add to your prompt, the more instruction that you give it, the more that it can modify the output that it's going to give you. And that's what we're talking about here, is it can give you some really interesting output. So do you want to talk a little bit about some of the prompts that we use?
Sure. Yeah. Um, and I think it's interesting as well. So what I've been trying to do is like develop prompts that I can just roll out really quickly and reuse, that are, I would call them kind of like stable prompts, that they kind of generally speak and do what I expect them to do. And so, and I'd love to talk to you actually a little bit about, let me give an example, I guess, first. So one would be, let's see, if I wanted to do like a standalone social media post, but based on a blog post I had written, I might say, "Please identify the top 3 most practical, useful, and unusual standalone points made in this article. Write a 75-word social media post for each point. Use the same style and tone as the original content. Make the opening line highly emotional and attention-grabbing. Please use the problem, agitate, solution copywriting framework for each social media post." And then I paste in the post. So that's like super specific.
Yeah, I love
Um,
that. I
and one of the
love how accurate you've gotten with the amount of detail that you're including in there. So it has a lot to work with there.
And one of the things I'd love to talk to you about is, because I know you work on a kind of an iterative prompt basis.
Hmm.
And what I'd love to talk to you about, if you want to describe maybe that process first, and then I have a question for you on it.
Yeah. So I'll give it an instruction. So please. So first thing is, I typically will say, as an expert copywriter, rewrite this. And so I'm sealing with the concept that it's going to be writing in the style of a copywriter. So it's going to use certain rules about the way that it does that. So I'll say something like, as an expert marketing copywriter, rewrite this. And sometimes I'll use in the form of bullet points, or sometimes I'll be taking bullet points and asking it to turn it into a paragraph. So, for example, one use of that might be before this show, before we went live, I was going to get it to rewrite what we were going to be talking about here. Host Alastair McDermott and guest Frank Prendergast discuss ChatGPT and the possibilities of AI for content creators. I was actually going to ask it to give me some more for that, and then I was gonna take that, rewrite that, and then use that to create the event. Now, as it turned out, ChatGPT actually went down this afternoon, even for people on paid plans. So I wasn't able to do that. But yeah, so typically I'll give it an expert marketing copywriter, or sometimes as a social media expert, and get it to do that when I'm using it for creation of content like that, and then it'll give me some output, and then I will give it an iteration. I'll say, rewrite that, but separate point two into two different bullets, and write and add a little bit more about X, and so I'll get it to change something, and then I'll look at the output and I'll say, you know what, it needs to do this, so I'll say, rewrite that, but make point number three more impactful by adding some emotional language, and so I'll get it to I'll look at the things that I think are not good about it, and I'll get it to fix those things. Rather than fixing it myself, I'll just ask it to do it. And so I'll go through like maybe 10 iterations on something. And the output that I have then, it's not perfect. I still wouldn't copy and paste into a blog post, for example, but it's probably 90% of the way there instead of 50% of the way there. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the kind of iterative approach. So yeah, that's how I do that.
Cool. Yeah, and it makes sense. And I suppose each piece of content is going to be, kind of unique. So your iterative prompts could be very much kind of contextual. And so, because what I was curious about was like, do you ever take successful prompts in your kind of iterations and then try and like reverse engineer them back into your original prompt?
Right. Okay. I see what you mean. To create an original kind of prompt that I could then use more generically. I
Yeah.
don't think that I do, and I tend to try and remember, because I don't actually yet have a good system for copy pasting prompts in, and I've been thinking about setting up a spreadsheet to put them in, and I've downloaded a lot of prompts from other people, but then I have 2,000 potential prompts on my
Yeah.
desktop, and it's like, well, I'm not going to do that. So I'm actually writing them by hand almost each time now,
Right.
and then going through that iterative process. And I'm sure that I could get more efficient with that, but at the moment it's working well enough for me, so I'm okay. There's a lot of things that I already know quite a bit about copywriting and things like that. So I'm able to make up some stuff on the fly that maybe I would recommend that people, if you're not familiar with copywriting, that maybe you'd want to do. Like, for example, I will quite often say, as a marketing copywriter, as an expert marketing copywriter, give me 15 headline options written in the style of a copy blogger headline. Um, Give me some of those options starting with the words "how to," and keep them between 5 and 8 words. And so that will be my specific prompt, and then I'll give the title for whatever it is. And so if you're not familiar, Copy Blogger wrote the Magnetic Headline series, which was some great analysis on what was working as really effective headlines. They wrote this about 10 or 15 years ago, I think. But it's a really great format to use for a headline that will get people to click on it, and it's not too kind of clickbait either. So I really like their style. So that's giving it some very specific instructions about the headlines. And the reason I want it to be short is because I want the headline to work on, like if I create a graphic for promoting something on mobile, I don't want too many words in there. So that's kind of a prompt that I would use for headlines. So you can see I'm just putting together some stuff from my own knowledge, and maybe if you're not into copywriting, don't have that same background, having those provided to you will be really useful, because you can then use those.
Brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. And actually, that might be a good segue into talking about getting ChatGPT away from the kind of more bland, because it will kind of default to a bland general style. And I remember listening to Mark Schaefer's podcast with Shelley Palmer, and he was saying that, when he tried it first, he asked it to write a blog post, and he was quite specific about the topic and about what it should include. But what he got back, he said, he wouldn't dream of publishing on his blog. But he then made a very simple modification, and he said, write this in the style of Shelley Palmer. And I've heard Mark Schaefer himself talk about this as well, that he has asked it to write a book chapter on something very specific in the style of Mark Schaefer. But they have a massive advantage over me because I don't have the body of work online that the language model would be trained on up to 2021. But you have developed some ways of getting ChatGPT to be a bit more creative in its voice.
Yeah. So one of those is, so I was thinking about my own writing style, and I tend to be a little bit more informal, more conversational. I write very much like I speak, and I'm fairly succinct in my writing style as well. So what I said was, my prompt was, ChatGPT, list some business authors that you have been trained on, which is the key part, that have an informal, conversational, succinct writing style. Give me 20 options. Right, you don't have to go 20 options, you can ask for 5 options. So it gave me all of these authors. Sheryl Sandberg was one, and Malcolm Gladwell was another. I don't think that Malcolm Gladwell has the same kind of writing style that I do, but those are just some examples.
Right.
And so what I did then was I took some bland ChatGPT output, and I said, rewrite this in the writing style of Sheryl Sandberg, for example. Again, that's just the one I happen to remember. And
Sure.
so it then rewrote that. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfectly me because I'm not Cheryl, but it was bloody good. It was really good.
Cool.
It was much more conversational, much more informal. When I say informal, ChatGPT sometimes interprets that as kind of folksy, and that's not really me either. So
Right.
I have to look out for that specifically. But yeah, getting it to say, rewrite this in the writing style of X, and if you put in whatever you want for X. Now, the other thing that I did that got me a bit of information as well was I took one of my blog posts and I said, analyze this writing and give me a table. And give me a table is a really useful prompt as well. You can ask it for bullet points, you can ask it for tables and other things. But I said, analyze this writing, this text that I've inputted, and give me it in form of a table, breaking down what you can tell about the author's writing style. And so what it did was it did an analysis of the text that I had input, and it started calling out what it could see in my writing style, because then I was able to use that to create a writing prompt in a writing style that is conversational, succinct, and whatever else those things were. I can't remember them all now, but I was able to
Right.
get it to do that to start to kind of model my writing style. And again, none of this can be copy pasted exactly, but it can do a lot of grunt work for you. It can do the 80/20, and that's what I think is where it really shines.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So, what about you? Like, how have you found the writing style thing? Is it that you're rewriting things afterwards, or are you trying to get it to learn your style?
Definitely rewriting things at the moment, and I'm gonna try what you're suggesting. I'm gonna try and find people who might have a similar style and just see how that works, because I have tried to get it to analyze my writing style, but I haven't had much success in getting it. I haven't had much success in getting it to write something that I would feel was close enough. So yeah, absolutely. Right now I'm definitely rewriting almost everything. What I find I do a lot of the time is I will get it to do things. I will get it to do any task at least twice, maybe 3 times, and I'll copy them into Google Drive, and then I'll cherry pick the best bits from each one,
Hmm.
and then add a little bit of my own voice as well. Um, so yeah, I'm still doing a fair bit of work, but it just takes, it's like you said, it's the 80/20. It takes the blank slate, the blank canvas away, and it does some of the initial grunt work.
Yeah. So
I don't
let's
think.
talk about the actual use cases there, because I think it's interesting to discuss like what people can actually do with this, because like we're not just talking about, social media posts or blog posts and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you've used it for?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier the YouTube descriptions. That was really useful. I'm trying to get it to write social media posts for blog posts so that I can repurpose old blog posts, because for me, one of the things with repurposing is you go back to an old blog post and you're trying to remember, well, what were the main points I was making in this, and and trying to come up with multiple posts that you can schedule in. But I'm still working on that. I've actually got it. I've got it creating some really good content for that. I just haven't started scheduling them in or actually using them yet. But I'm happy with where I've got to on that. Titles, by the time I finish writing a post, a lot of the time I'm like, I'm not great at writing the title. So I will, Marcy had me do an exercise last year when I had written an article. She had me do an exercise which was write 100 titles for it to find the best title. It was a fantastic exercise, but wow, like my brain nearly melted. So, so before Christmas, instead of doing that exercise, I asked ChatGPT to write 100 headlines for me, and then I just went through and I started picking out the best bits, the best ideas. It had angles that I wouldn't have thought of using, and I didn't use anything like word for word, but I wouldn't have got to the title I did if it hadn't been for ChatGPT. What else have I used it for? Good question. We've used it to start blog posts. To be honest, most of our usage is social media, blog posts, and titles, but never as is. I did also come across somebody the other day talking about, so you mentioned earlier, like you have a lot of copywriting knowledge. And I think I've learned a lot about copywriting over the last couple of years, and I'm married to a copywriter. Not everyone has those skills. And so I think ChatGPT could be really good for just quickly improving on content that is a little bit lackluster. However, I will say as well that I'm not 100% sure yet how much copywriting skill do you need to then assess ChatGPT's output. So the thing that I came across that was interesting was a copywriter who was working with clients and who, if they just needed a quick win, the copywriter would use ChatGPT to improve, say, their LinkedIn About section. So they're not having to pay the copywriter to go away and do a full rewrite on their About, but the copywriter is able to apply their skills to the ChatGPT output to just get them a quick win of a bit of an improvement on where they're at right now. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and I've seen it do that kind of summarize, rewriting, rewrite this sentence to add more emotion or more impact. And what you mentioned earlier on about asking for 100, I rarely actually ask for 100 in output because it just takes too long. But I have noticed that I've asked for 5 and I haven't been happy, and then I ask it for 20 options, and then I don't always take one of the 20 verbatim, but I might combine number 7 and number 14, and kind of combine.
Yeah.
And I think that's really effective when you do stuff like that, giving options on things like that, and it's really great. Like for people who are not great communicators in the written form, it can be really great for taking emails or messages they want to write and tidying them up. People who maybe English is not their first language, or they have dyslexia or things like that. It's going to be amazing for that. And I just want to mention, because this is like, we're talking about the limitations and the mediocre output and stuff like that. The capabilities that it's going to have in a few years' time is going to be enormous. It's going to be, because it's going to improve exponentially, and I think that it's important to remember that like what we're looking at here is going to continue to improve, and it's not going to improve in a kind of a straight line. It's going to improve. It's just going to get so much better. Even the amount of data that they've got from the way that we're using it is going to feed in. Like they're probably doing analysis on how we're using it with the system, which
Yeah.
also reminds me, This was something else I was able to get it to do. I have spreadsheets full of survey responses, and so I was able to take those survey responses, paste that data in, and ask it to summarize the key points that people had put in when they responded. So I was able to take 50 or 60 text inputs and ask it to summarize the key points. What were people seeing? The survey was about why had somebody not started a website, and it was really interesting to get the reasons back as to why people hadn't done it. It turns out that in some summary, I already knew a lot of the data, but it was interesting to see what it had come back, and it basically summarized it correctly, which is what I was trying to do with to test it. But
Really interesting. That's two ideas you've given me that I'm going to try out when we finish this call. One is the survey one you just mentioned, because I have a survey that I need to analyze, so I'm definitely going to try that. And the other one is the email one. That's really interesting, because I literally helped a client just today in writing a difficult email reply to get the tone right. And I'm gonna put ChatGPT to the test after this call and just see what it would have said, to see if it would have been an appropriate email to send. That'll be fascinating.
Yeah, and so the scope of what you can do with it, you can ask it to, for example, you can ask it to give you a meal plan for two people, say for a week. You could say, create me a low carbohydrate or high protein meal plan for two people for 5 days, and it'll give you that. And then you can say, can you give me that in the form of a shopping list? And it will do that. It can do things like that really, really well. Now, it's creating this from its database. So, so the meal plan it's going to create is going to be, because there's a lot of meal plans out there on the internet, there's a lot of recipes out there. It's pretty damn good. But it is only going to be as good as that, whatever that input was. And it's kind of averaging, like that's what it's doing, is it's averaging all of the meal plans that it ever encountered, and it's taking the average of all of those and then giving you a suggestion. And we don't know exactly how it randomizes or prioritizes those things, but it's using it like that it's really useful and a time saver. I think it's going to be used for stuff like that a lot. So the uses are, there's a lot of uses where it's really incredibly good, and then the stuff that we talked about already where it can actually be dangerous, and you genuinely need to keep an eye on it to make sure that it's just not making stuff up, and and that's where being an expert comes in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So is there anything else that we need to discuss that we haven't talked about yet, that people need to look at when they're doing this? I mean, I would suggest that everybody go and play around with it a bit, just to see, and learn a little bit about the way that you write your prompts, because that will make a big difference in terms of what you're going to get back in terms of output. Is there any other recommendations that you'd have for people with this?
I think it is what you just said there. Really, it is a case of just experimenting with it, playing with it, figuring out like where in your own processes, because as you said, the potential uses for it are very broad. So it's figuring out like, well, what are the things that I'm doing right now that ChatGPT could help me on, and everybody's processes are going to be slightly different, so it's going to be different for everyone. So it's just that thing of figuring out, where in my process could this speed me up. And I will say, there is like a word of warning. It will slow you down initially because you have to figure out, how do I prompt it? How do I get it to give me what I want? That is going to be a little bit of a time sink. But then it's like, so in my case, I'm saving any useful prompts into a Google Drive document, so that the next time I go to ChatGPT, I can just copy, paste, and get a couple of social media posts, or copy and paste and get a summary of a video that I'm happy with, or copy and paste and get 3 really good quotes from a podcast episode that I was on, or something like that. Because again, even with prompting it for quotes from something, I found it would hallucinate, and the prompt would not be exact. It would be kind of like, yeah, I think I said something like that, but I didn't actually say that exactly. So I had to develop a prompt that said, find a quote, do not change it, do not edit it, do not modify it, give it to me word for word from the transcript. So yeah, there is a little bit of time in figuring those things out. And I mean, I share a lot of the prompts that I find with people in the hopes that it'll cut down on that time a little bit.
I wanted to ask you to tell the viewer, the listener, because I know you had a really great way of describing kind of how you see ChatGPT personified as the junior copywriter. Can you just describe that for us?
Yeah, so I called ChatGPT your new LSD loving junior copywriter because there's a good chance it could hallucinate wildly, but equally, you will be delighted with it, with what it gives you some of the time. But you're always going to have to check it. You're always going to have to check its work.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to leave it. Frank, I always ask people on the podcast, and I didn't prompt you with this up front, so sorry. What would be your number one tip for anybody who wants to build or increase their authority?
Well, I guess the number one tip is start creating content, because I think it took me an awfully long time to start creating content. I mean, like you said, we've known each other for so long, but we've known each other for, like, I think you said it was about 15 years. And I mean, I've been in the space like 25 years. I only started creating content like properly in any way meaningfully in the last 5 years. I think it's a huge hurdle for a lot of people to get over. And sometimes I think, when you become a content creator, you're in that filter bubble and it feels like everybody is creating content. They are not. There are so many business owners, there are so many solopreneurs that are not creating content. And I think if you want to build authority, you have to raise your visibility. You have to start creating content. And start building your authority by sharing your expertise and sharing your knowledge.
Yeah, I love it, and that's like, I'm in the same boat, and I can say that it was around February or March of 2021, because that's when I started the podcast. So that's when I truly I've been writing blog posts since 2007, but that was the first time that I really became a content creator. Was when I started the podcast. So yeah, I'm 100% with you on that. Frank, where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, frankandmarcy.com. Marcy is Marci. And connect with me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is where I love connecting with people, chatting to people, building a community, building a tribe, building my network. So yeah, please connect with me on LinkedIn and let's chat.
Yeah, and I highly recommend following your posts on LinkedIn, because they're great. Frank, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. This has been fantastic. Loved it. Thanks a million.